So greetings and welcome everyone. I'm Mélanie Cueff, the Scientific Officer of the Global Seaweed Coalition. And it's my pleasure to guide you through this conversation today. So on the behalf of the Coalition, I'm truly delighted to welcome you all to this new scientific webinar on seaweed and biosecurity led by Dr. Elizabeth Cottier-Cook. But first, a few words about the Global Seaweed Coalition. So we are a global partnership established to deliver a safe and sustainable seaweed sectors as it scales up. So we do that through 4 action pillars: funding, advocacy, policy, and science and technology. So on funding, we seed projects through competitive call for proposal. On advocacy, we spread the seaweed narrative in local, national, and global forums. And on policy, we influence policymakers at a global level. On science and technology, we deliver informative webinars, and we also have a scientific council helping us with our call for proposals. So the GSC is hosted by UNGC, United Nations Global Compact, and has received initial funding from a Lloyd's Register Foundation. We also have the support of the CNRS, the French National Research Center, which I belong to. So far we have delivered 1.5 million across 32 different projects in 27 countries through 3 competitive call for proposals. And GSC members represent the entire seaweed value chain. So we have reached 1,200 members now. So from smallholders to multinational businesses, and from research institutions to intergovernmental organizations, all working together to deliver a full potential of the seaweed sector. So a couple of housekeeping details before we go in the substance of the event today. So Azedine and Celia will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to raise your question during the doctor presentation. And we'll ask you to stay muted unless you are called upon, even though I'm sure you are all familiar with this. So now turning to our event. So the objective is to provide you with scientific information on seaweed and biosecurity, and especially about introducing a new progressive management pathway to improve seaweed biosecurity. So Dr. Elizabeth Cottier-Cook, based at the Scottish Association of Marine Science, will explain how this pathway could assist your country in safeguarding the future of the seaweed industry. So quickly about our agenda today. So I will leave the floor to the scientific director of the coalition, Dr. Philippe Potin, that will introduce a bit further Dr. Elizabeth Cottier-Cook, and then we'll leave the floor to the topic of the presentation for about 40 minutes, and this will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A. So Philippe, over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's really my pleasure to introduce Professor Elizabeth Cottier-Cook, who is the head of I have to say the right word, United Nations University Associate Institute at SLAMS, located in Oban, in Scotland, in the Highlands. And Liz has a long career of a scientist focusing on the impact of aquaculture on the introduction of invasive species in different ecosystems. But during the last 10 years, she was especially involved in a seaweed project, and especially in the global seaweed Seaweed Star project, developing our activities mainly on the impact of the development of on the expansion of the seaweed aquaculture which in the context of climate change have seen a lot of increase in the diseases and pests occurring in the cultivation fields. So Liz has developed a lot of activities with, especially with developing countries. She was also involved in writing a lot of policy briefs, which had a very important impact worldwide for the development of seaweed biosecurity. And she also recently published a very seminal paper in Nature last year dedicated to seaweed biosecurity and the future of the seaweed sector. So I'm sure within the new plans under the UK-funded project she's managing, she will present us a very exciting and interesting seminar today. So Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Philippe, for that introduction. You make me blush. Thank you. It's really good to be here and to see so many familiar faces. So that's really excellent. I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully we will be there and you can see. Is that okay, Philippe? Mélanie, you're nodding. Okay, wonderful, excellent. Well, yes, thank you again for that excellent introduction. Thank you. Mélanie approached me a couple of months ago and said, would you talk please to the coalition and to members about biosecurity? And as Philippe was saying, this is something that has been quite close to my heart now for probably 8 to 10 years. So I'm going to just talk you through the steps that we've gone through to get to where we are now. Sort of a little bit of journey through time, really. So yeah, as they said as well, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat and we'll have some time at the end to answer those. So moving on. There we go. As many of you already know, the seaweed industry has expanded quite rapidly over the last sort of 20 years. And this diagram I got from the Hatch Blue report, the great Hatch Blue report that came out recently. So you can see how particularly the eukumatoids, the Capophycas, the eucuma, the sort of more tropical related seaweeds, and also Saccharina, particularly Saccharina japonica, you can see the growth. I mean, and we're talking millions of tons here. It's not insignificant values. So you can see how these two in particular have really increased in their production volume. But obviously, just in the last sort of few years, we're now starting to see a sort of dip in the production, particularly of these red, sort of more tropical carragenophytes, the eukumatoids. And this dip there's a number of different reasons for this, including sort of price volatility and things like this. But one of the key challenges that we've been finding is that related to outbreaks of pests and disease that Philippe mentioned here. One of those diseases or syndromes that we found is called ice disease, where there's sort of this whitening of the thallus and it just basically disintegrates there. And there's also been challenges with these sort of epiphytes and epiendophytes, these tiny little filamentous red seaweeds that attach to the surface and burrow in through the thallus. And basically, both of these have quite a significant impact on production, on yield, but also the carrageenan content and quality of the crop. And there was a report came out sort of basically saying that in the Philippines a while back, they were losing, over 15% of their production yield, which equates to around $100 million US. So it's not an insignificant issue that is being faced by this industry. And it can have major socioeconomic impacts on communities, because it can mean that a farm can basically lose the entire crop within a matter of weeks or days or weeks. And it's then very, very difficult for that farmer to then reestablish that farm, because the majority of the production of macro algae occurs in developing countries. So we're not just talking, though, about, isolated cases where pests and disease outbreaks occur. These pests and diseases can actually be spread to other marine ecoregions, other areas of the world. And what we've been, and this was a great, Janina Brackle and the group did a study, did an analysis of where some of these seaweeds, particularly we looked at Capophycus and Eucheuma, where some of them had been introduced. Many of them, there's no legislation, there's no policy to stop them being introduced, where they're being introduced into countries. And then what we've been finding is that around sort of 10 years later, after their introduction, that's when you're then seeing a sort of outbreak of ice or some of these epi-endophytes. So it's not just the seaweeds that are being transferred. It's their pests and diseases that are going with them. And it's just taking them a little bit of time to get used to their environment. And then you'll find that there'll be an outbreak. So it's this sort of globalization of trade, really. And that's something that we need to look into when it comes to biosecurity. So onto the sort of concept itself. So in terms of the goal, it's basically to control the quality of your crop. You want to be able to produce the highest quality possible because that's where you're going to get the most money. So you need to, it's all about preventing and minimizing the introduction of pests and diseases. And it's not a new concept. They've been tools, biosecurity has been extensively used in the finfish, the shrimp aquaculture sectors to limit these diseases. And for myself, I'm here on the west coast of Scotland. We're right in the center of we have a major salmon farming industry here on our doorstep. And around 25 years ago, I saw firsthand the consequences of something called infectious salmon anemia. I don't know whether many of you have heard of that, but where they had to basically cull thousands of fish, tens of thousands of salmon, and close sites down and basically fallow those sites. And because of outbreaks such as that, the shrimp, the finfish aquaculture industries have really tightened up on their biosecurity. And sort of this is where I've come from in my background. So biosecurity and the measures and the toolkits and the tools, they all provide a way to assess and manage risk to both, obviously, to the animals, to the plants, but also to human health as well, and the wider environment. And there's a whole range of biosecurity tools: horizon scanning, early warning, exclusion, eradication. I'm sure most of you have heard of these, as well as actually practical protocols. Because the last thing you want, well, one, you want to prevent introduction in the first place. And then the second thing, the last thing you want is to keep reinfecting your farm, reinfecting your stock. So it's about sort of managing both of those. As I mentioned before, it's not new, the whole biosecurity concept. In the shrimp aquaculture industry, it's really interesting to see that, first of all, they went about domesticating a lot of the brood stock. They went about producing specific pathogen-free larvae in their hatcheries, and that really allowed them to deal with some of the earlier sort of outbreaks of disease, the white spots disease and others, and allowed the industry to grow. But that wasn't enough on its own. And you're always going to be faced by new diseases coming in. It's just the nature of aquaculture, the aquaculture industry, new diseases coming in. But they've really tightened up on their biosecurity control measures, and that in this case, allowed them to reverse that decline in production that was being shown in the shrimp industry. So it's an add-on, to other measures. But it's really important, you cannot rest on, we say you cannot rest on your laurels. You have to still be vigilant. These were just taken from the end of last year, just a scan of the online material. So even in the salmon sector, where you think they should have cracked biosecurity by now, they're still seeing sea lice outbreaks. In certain countries, this was in Iceland. They're still seeing, I mentioned infectious salmon anemia. It's not gone away. So they are still seeing outbreaks. And then, of course, in the oyster industry, there's other viruses there. So biosecurity is not something that you can just introduce and then walk away. But it's a process. It's something that you have to keep coming back to and improving and revisiting. So going back to 2016 then, where I was working on a project funded by the UK science council, one of the UK science councils, called Global Seaweed. And back then, 2016, we put together a policy brief. I was just going through and looking back. And so even back in 2016, we were sort of one of the key policy recommendations in that was about, you know, the need to focus on developing and enhancing biosecurity programs, looking at capacity building, incentivizing development of diagnostics, looking to you know, so you could rapidly detect disease and other species. So that was really, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, even back to 2016, that's when we first sort of came up with this. And more than welcome to follow the website and take a look at that policy brief in more detail. So not long after, we got some funding from the UK government, and it was the birth of Global Seaweed Star. So I can see Flower sitting there. Flower's one of our key members in there. So it was really interesting, because around the same time, the United Nations FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, they were starting to embark on a program in terms of like developing an international biosecurity strategy for the aquaculture sector globally, because they recognized that there was just not a strategic overview for improving sort of biosecurity across the sector. And this wonderful lady here, Melba Bondadrenazzo, was this sort of lady who was spearheading this particular new initiative. And I don't know whether she came to one of my talks or how she found out about the Global Seaweed Star program, but she approached us because she realized it was very much centered on finfish and shrimp. And there was no mention of seaweeds really so far. And they'd had one planning event. There was no mention of seaweeds. And she realized that, of course, seaweed production is second only to finfish production when it comes to aquaculture. It's a massive, huge sector, and it was something that was missing. So she kindly invited us to join in with this initiative, which is very much based on the control pathway that was developed for foot and mouth disease. So it's a sort of progression of that. So through this PMPAB, shortened, very much had the key aims of reducing the burden of disease, improving health at farm and so at farm level, local level, and then at national level, minimizing the global spread of disease, sort of recognizing that it's not contained within national borders. Of course, disease doesn't recognize those borders. Optimizing, you know, the socioeconomic benefits, attracting investment opportunities, because that's another thing that we found in that investors want to make sure that at the end of the day, they have a crop, they have something that they can sell. If you have a risk that your entire crop could fail because of a disease or a pest outbreak, then they're not as keen to invest as you can imagine. And also when it comes to insurance companies, how do you get insurance for a product where there's quite a high risk that it could fail? So it's all about building a more resilient industry that people want to invest in. So, and then it's also, you know, about achieving these One Health goals as well. So this is sort of how it was to begin with. And then we were asked to come in and sort of tack on the plant health bit, which was great. And then there were these 4 stages to the aquaculture biosecurity. So the first one being identify those risks and define them. Then sort of initiate whatever systems you need to control or to help minimize the introductions of pests and disease. As sort of feedback loop, enhance those systems. And then the 4th stage being you have your sort of core management structures for biosecurity established. You have your health system, you have your diagnostics, and then, you know, people feel happy then to trade with you, to work with you. Investors feel happy to come in and support your industry. And that's the sort of how the progression works over these 4 stages. or is meant to. And if anyone's more interested, is interested in this sort of the guidelines for application came out last year. So there's the website there that you can visit to read that in full. And it just, as part of guidelines as well, we're still in the development, or some of these have already been developed, but others are still being finalized, and they should be by the end of this year. But there's a whole range of other documents that go to support this progressive management pathway that people are working on, as you see, like checklists, baseline assessments, or how to go about doing that, the tools to do that, how to go, training modules, emergency preparedness, risk-based surveillance. So it's a really wonderful piece of work, I think, that will help governments sort of at national, this is sort of mainly aimed at national, sort of regional levels. So this is something that is now being rolled out in various parts of the world. So yeah, it's really aiming to provide countries with a pathway to help them enhance their biosecurity capacity, aquaculture biosecurity capacity. So, so how do we get, so I've sort of mentioned that seaweeds are now included in that, which is really good, but we sort of felt that there was still need for sort of more specificity and more something more that was directed for the seaweed aquaculture industry. And we were kindly invited by the FAO team to go and attend a meeting in Norway, which was like a side event to their main committee, fisheries committee meetings. And that's where we proposed, and we had various people come and talk about development potential and challenges for the seaweed aquaculture industry. And this is where we sort of started to think about a progressive management pathway for seaweed biosecurity. And following on from this, we sort of went through a number of workshops and stakeholder consultations, 2009, and with our partner countries with Global Seaweed Star. So the Philippines, Malaysia, Tanzania, went through various consultations and discussed, sort of really about what were the main management challenges related to seaweed biosecurity, from obviously the producer all the way through to national and international authorities, getting ideas about how they could be addressed, and then thinking about how we could produce a PMP, progressive management pathway for seaweed, that is very much aligned and could be rolled out in conjunction with the main one, which was obviously for aquaculture biosecurity. We wanted them very much to be able, to be rolled out together. Discussing obviously the key benefits, thinking about who would take ownership of the plan and provide long-term commitment and financial commitment as well, and then thinking about timeframes for implementation. So we then, it's familiar, it's very much based on the main one, the aquaculture biosecurity PMP. So, thinking about those 4 stages that I've already mentioned, the first one being defining your biosecurity strategy, then taking action to kind of implement that, enhancing it, and then finally having a management system that is established, well established, and supported by the national government. And sort of looking at those 4 stages in a little bit more detail, then, thinking about stage 1, creating a task force, who would be involved in that task force, which organizations, thinking about identifying the seaweed species, the commercial ones that are grown, and what are the key sort of yield limiting diseases and pests, coming up with a national list, thinking about risk impact, risk assessment, risk impact, and identifying any current, biosecurity practices that are in place to then allow you to draft your sort of biosecurity scheme. And then once that's sort of in place and embedded, then you can move on to stage 2. You can still be doing some things in stage 2 when you're doing stage 1. It doesn't preclude things, but, moving on in sort of stepwise place. This is where you start to implement your basic sort of biosecurity planning, your scheme with various measures. You can maybe draft a national national strategy for seaweed health management. and start looking at those legal frameworks, start looking at the policies and the legal frameworks to support all of this. Are they sufficient? Are there gaps in that legislation that could be strengthened? Looking at other sort of management indicators and coming up with a surveillance program for monitoring any outbreaks. And then obviously building your seaweed health services, your diagnostic labs, for example. So just sort of building on what's happening. And it was really, I think I'm safe to say, someone might, but through Global Seaweed Star, it was really good because I think we pretty much in the Philippines, in Tanzania, and in Malaysia, we pretty much came up with or addressed most of the things that, you know, I've mentioned here in stage 1, allowing the country then to progress to stage 2. Then stage 3 is where you do more contingency planning. If you have an outbreak, what happens, refining your measures, refining your health management plan, more surveillance programs, records, traceability systems, and detection and reporting mechanisms. So just building on the first 2 stages, and then obviously by stage 4, this is where you ideally would have your health management system in place. It's being strengthened here by various legal frameworks, policies, and guidance notes. You've got a fully, well, wouldn't this be wonderful, a fully equipped staff for disease and pest identification and reporting. That's all in place. And then just continuous enhancement of that biosecurity scheme through research programs, R&D that's happening, that can help provide all that baseline data to just strengthen the measures that you're putting in place. So those are the sort of 4 sort of key stages to work through. And as Philippe sort of said, it was great that we've kind of brought all this together and got it published in Nature Communications 2 years ago now. So that was really, we weren't quite expecting to get it published there, but it was, and it was really good. So if you want to go and read up about anything that I've mentioned in more detail, then please do have a read of that paper. And there are other resources as well available. They're all open access. This is just a fraction of what we produce through Global Seaweed Star. So there are various sort of farm standards, operating procedures, farm management procedures, and this is obviously the guidelines for application of the PMP for aquaculture biosecurity that was produced last year. So lots of this, just Google it, but you can also find it on our website at globalseaweed.org. As well as all sorts of other videos. There's YouTube videos, there's all sorts that go along with this. So just moving on to other work that we did to support this, the sort of recommendations, the biosecurity recommendations. We did quite a lot of work with our partners through the Global Seaweed Star program, looking at actually what the policies were in our partner countries and what actually happened on the ground. So it was really interesting to do a review of the policies and the sort of regulations that were out there, were currently out there, and we did like a full systematic review. And it was really interesting to see that there were many biosecurity related policies, but majority of them were not binding. That means they're not enforceable. They're not enforced by law. They're sort of more guidance or voluntary guidelines, things like that. We found as well that seaweeds and seaweed aquaculture was not specifically mentioned in the majority of these policies. They did mention maybe aquaculture, but seaweeds was really not specifically mentioned. Many of the policies, which I found, I don't know why I found it difficult to believe, but I suppose because I come from an academic background, but many of them were just based on stakeholder opinion rather than robust sort of scientific evidence. And that there was such a wide difference between the policies and practices between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Tanzania. There was a lot more progressive, I think, in the Philippines, followed by Malaysia and then Tanzania. But it was interesting to see that there were some biosecurity related policies, but not so many. And we produced an online database. So if anyone's interested in going and actually looking at some of those policies, it's a searchable database, which you can find there. We also wanted to know what was happening on the ground, what was currently happening with the, what were the farmers doing themselves? If they had an outbreak of ice, what were they doing at the farm level? And was there anything that we could do to suggest to help them improve their practices? So we followed knowledge, attitude and practice surveys, KAP surveys or CAP surveys, which were adapted from the human health sector. And these have been widely used throughout the world by a whole range of, FAO, WHO use them as well. So we carried out these surveys with farmers in the Philippines, Malaysia and Tanzania. And these were our early career researchers that went to various regions in these countries and speaking to the farmers there. And just to give you just a taster, just some of the results that we got from Malaysia. So 67 farmers based in 12 villages were interviewed in 3 production areas, which were in the main sort of production in Sabah, main area for seaweed production, and also 10 fisheries officers. And it was really interesting to see that, well, the knowledge, around 50% of farmers were aware, but that means 50% weren't really aware of the issues and what biosecurity meant. Attitude, yeah, they were quite keen to know more, as you can imagine, because they realized that it was they really didn't want to see their farm, the last thing they want to see is outbreaks of pest and disease on their farm. So their attitude was they were very keen to learn more. And then their practice, again, below 50% of farmers had any practical or practiced any biosecurity measures at all on their farm. So this was something that we saw could obviously was obviously in need of improvement. Speaking to the extension officers as well, only again similar percentage knew about the biosecurity. Obviously, there's obviously a bit more interest, well, a lot more interest, and there was a little bit higher in terms of them knowing about some potential possible measures in which you could take to reduce the likelihood of introducing pests and diseases. But that was just interesting, and it was a little bit, obviously it was different in the Philippines and Malaysia. And again, if you want to read up more, these are the papers here where you can look into this in more detail. We also did some work at the farm level about looking at where those key sort of risk, if you were doing like a HACCP measure, hazard critical control action points. So where if you were going to put your efforts in controlling the introduction of pests and disease, where would you put those efforts? From doing the sort of risk analysis, 4 main sort of key areas sort of came out. So the first one being, of course, it's pretty much common sense, is that you really don't want to be introducing infected crop or infected seedlings into your farm. You needed to be able to, if you can produce and use disease-resistant strains, then absolutely try and do that. Not that there's many out there, but and traceability is really key. Knowing where you are bringing your crops from and knowing that the region that they're from is actually disease-free as well. Farm equipment was another sort of risk area where you're reusing equipment, ropes, ties that had been previously used in a previous harvest that had been infected by ice, for example. So that was another high-risk site. The working platform, so how the crop and the condition of the crop before it actually went into the water, when you were sort of attaching it to the lines, if it was wounded or dehydrated, or could it be contaminated. So just making sure that the crop was in as good a condition as you could possibly have it before going into the water. And then also, particularly we're finding high water temperatures, low salinity, low water movement. These sort of things obviously stress those plants, and then the chances of them succumbing to a disease outbreak is obviously much higher, and obviously site location was quite important as well. So these doing this sort of big sort of meta-analysis were the 4 key areas that came out as being the highest risk. We also did an actual experiment in Malaysia where we took one side of the farm, as it were, and we did various biosecurity treatments on it. And then we took another area where it was just left and treated as it normally is. So on the biosecurity treated farm, the seedlings were, and when they were introduced, so the new seedlings were visually checked and only obviously the seedlings where they were healthy, looked healthy. And so they were used, purchase new ropes, which we totally understand you cannot do every growth cycle on your farm, but it was just really interesting to do it in this way. So everything was, the farm equipment was new or treated and cleaned. Any fouling was removed from any of the crop and the ropes throughout the course of the experiment. Farm waste was removed and taken on land, and physical environment was monitored, and various crops were, every 2 days the seaweeds were checked. So there was quite intensive treatment that was happening, but it was just for this particular experiment, just to see the differences. And it was really interesting when we looked at the specific growth rates. So we've got Capophycus malinaceus on the left, the sort of native to Malaysia, and Capophycus alvarezi on the right here. And it was really interesting that on the whole, it was significant here, but on the whole, you were seeing higher specific growth rates for the crops that were on the biosecurity treated farm compared to the Capophycus that was just on the farm, that was just left as usual and managed as normal. But interestingly, it was here. So hopefully you can see this, but these are the two. So this is Capophycus malinaceus, this Capophycus alvarezi. And this is where there was no treatment. And I think the first thing that sort of jumps out is this light gray colored bar here, which is the epiphytes. So, there were far more, 50% here, 30, 35%, far more after 40 days of the growing period of these epiphytes compared to, we're looking at under 10% here, where it was treated, the biosecurity farm, treated farm. And then the same you can see with the ice. There was far more incidence of ice in both, mainly more on the Capophycus malinaceus than the alvarezi. But altogether, you could get up to, I should say, 75% pest and disease reduction, which if you could then equate that to the increase in yield and the quality of the crop that you're getting. So, okay, you're having to put more, your labor costs are higher, and the time you're spending on the farm is higher because you're having to do those checks. But at the end of the day, you're getting more crop and a higher quality crop, which will then feed into a higher value, you would hope. So just going through the operating procedures, knowing your seedling source, checking the initial condition, making sure that your ropes and your farm equipment is clean as it can and not reusing infected crop. Growing out, as you're checking your farm regularly, hopefully detecting signs of diseases, removing any diseased crop, and maybe using sort of other farm management measures and monitoring closely. And then when it comes to the harvesting, just being careful, using careful handling, suitable drying techniques, obviously not drying infected crop together with healthy crop, and disposing of the infected crop to landfill if you can, and not just taking it off the lines and putting it into the water. Disinfecting farm equipment. The disinfection just could be UV radiation. It doesn't have to be with any chemicals or anything like that. And then, potentially moving in, if you're moving through those stages of the progressive management pathway, looking at sort of more regular monitoring and recording and surveillance to whatever authority or environmental extension officer that you have for your region, and just building that effective reporting and surveillance system. So just to end, just to those sort of take-home messages then really, just to say, obviously those disease and pest outbreaks will continue unless biosecurity measures are actively implemented, both at national but also at local farm level. Just quite simple biosecurity measures can help reduce these outbreaks by up to 75%, what we showed anyway on the farms in Malaysia. Using that framework, the PMP AB-Seaweed framework, can help enhance aquaculture biosecurity capacity, I believe, at national level. But obviously investment, as always, financially is needed for capacity building, establishing diagnostic laboratories and surveillance programs. For me, if seaweed producing countries can specifically mention seaweeds in their policies and legislation and not just group it under aqua, I think that would really, really help. And please do remember there's many biosecurity resources now that are freely available online. So for extension officers, if you're an extension officer, if you're a farmer, or if you work with farmers, please do let them know that these resources are available for them, to just provide them with practical measures to help reduce these disease and pest outbreaks. So this is all of the various people, and I'm so sorry if I've missed some people off this picture here, but there's been a whole massive team of people behind all of the work that we've done so far. And fingers crossed, we've just put in another proposal to the UK UKRI, which is UK Research and Innovation. There's a call that came out. It's another £3 million. We've just put that call in, and it would involve the implementation of the progressive management pathway for seaweed. It would provide funding for us to help implement that in, I'm hoping, if I get this right, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, I think Callum were nodding, Thailand, and hopefully into Vietnam as well. So it's really, the call was very much for Southeast Asia. So if we can try to implement it there, then we can see if we can roll it out further afield. There's a further call. I don't know what's happening in the UK government at the moment. There's just so many, there seems to be a number of funds coming available. So there's another one later this year where it's not just aimed at Southeast Asia, it's aimed at developing countries worldwide. So it's called the Oceans Programme. So I'm hoping that we can also put in a bid to that. And that's me. I could rabbit on for hours, couldn't I? But thank you all so much. I'm open to any questions, and I don't think I've run too much over time. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. It was very interesting, very insightful, and great that you have more funds coming in the UK. I hope you can continue this program.
Fingers crossed. It hasn't. Yeah, we'll find out in a couple of months' time. So fingers crossed. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely learn a lot, and it's very interesting to share those charts that you shared with the locals as well to convince.
Yeah.
So we have a question from the chat, and then I will take question from our group. So the first question is from Inka. Could you provide a practical example how the biosecurity process is done? How many persons are involved? How much does it cost, and how much does the taken measure increase the price of the product?
Yeah.
Multiple question.
Yeah.
Partially already explained. So I posed this question in the middle of your talk, but I mean, really, from practical measures, I could imagine that this is really difficult also to establish.
Yeah, from the practical side of things, I don't know whether Cecilia's on the call. I don't think she is. It was Cecilia Cambe. She's working with us again in Malaysia at the moment, and I mean, it's very labor intensive. Obviously, ultimately, it would be a case of trying to mechanize it for some of the larger farms, but for many of the farms, they're really quite small. but it just would mean the farmers going out every low tide or every couple of days or every week just to tend the lines and to check, or they could take a maybe check one line in every 5 every time they go out or something, just to remove any obvious signs or any obvious disease thallus, and bring it ashore and dispose of it, just so it doesn't take hold and doesn't infect the entire crop. But it does involve. But Cecilia did some in her paper, in the paper that I refer to there is more detail. She did some sort of evaluation on how much it's likely to cost, but how much you're likely to get in terms of increased yield and increased amount of money that you can get. So please do look in more detail in that paper for that information. So hopefully that's helped.
Thank you, Liz. I think we have one question from Nicola and then from Callum.
I have a bit more than one question for me. Well, I'm getting an observation. First of all, Liz, thank you. That was fantastic. And I'm looking forward to receiving it so that I can dig down into it. And couldn't support more highly your recommendation that governments separate out seaweed and highlight seaweed, not just aquaculture, but seaweed. So thank you for that. That's yet another reason to do that. I'm wondering whether there's any research that is comparing seaweed grown in IMTA setups versus seaweed that is grown separately. So that's a question to you. And then a thought, perhaps. You did mention regional engagement, and I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to engage, say, the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, to get an African approach already. So really taking a regional approach there. And that maybe final point, that may also be a hook in to get some public sector financing, to have to include in a strategic approach to getting public sector financing for seaweed. Thanks.
Yeah.
So that was a lot.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Nicola. In terms of the IMTA, and Thierry's online here as well, and Thierry's just got his hand up as well. I know that obviously there's been talk about including seaweeds alongside salmon farming and oyster and mussel growing here in Scotland for many years, but people have been very reluctant to do that because of disease transfer between one species infecting another, and that's been one of the challenges that we've had to overcome in terms of persuading the industry, particularly the salmon industry, to invest. And there has been some obviously small-scale pilot studies, but I haven't been directly involved in those, but it's something that I have thought about. I mean, Thierry, are you all right? Can I turn, is there much discussion in Canada, with the IMTA? I mean, you work all over the world, but is there much discussion about the risk of disease transmission between species in these IMTA systems? Oh, he's on mute. Maybe he's not listening to this. Can you hear? Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, there we go. Oh no, we still can't hear you.
Cannot hear you, Thierry.
Oh no. No. Ah. Maybe Thierry. Oh. No, we still can't hear you. Ah.
Okay.
But maybe, yeah, so maybe Thierry could share some, I'm sure there's some publications. So Nicola, it would be really interesting to see how it could combine, to be combined, and the biosecurity and the pathway and everything. So that in terms of your regional approach, it's really interesting because NACA, oh gosh, I'm going to say this wrong, something Asia, aquaculture and Central NACA. It's a regional, I've worked with them and I can't think of exactly what it means. I'm sure someone will type in the chat what it means. They have already signed up to rolling out the PMP for PMP, so for aquaculture biosecurity. So they've already signed up for that. And there's a couple of other countries who have already signed up to do that. So it's happening as we speak. And that's what I would really love to now get the funding from the UK government to help roll out the seaweed one, because we can work with them at the same time in doing that. And absolutely, you know, you were saying about the sort of regional approach and applying it to Africa. If I can get this other pot, if I can get the funding later on this year, that's where I would really love to, and this is where I'm looking at flower here, I would really love to include sort of Tanzania and South Africa and some of those others in terms of trying to implement the seaweed, the progressive program in that particular region, but it would need further and you're right, you know, once we can show that we are implementing it within a country, across a region, and then we're more likely to bring in further public investment. So that's sort of in my mind of how I would like to see it. So try and roll it out within a country, within a region, across these countries, and then broaden it out, but also obviously working closely with FAO in terms of them implementing the wider PMP for aquaculture biosecurity, tie it all together. Yeah. Can we hear from Thierry now? Is the sound working? Don't know. Oh, that's such a shame, because obviously no,
doesn't seem to work.
Oh.
So we'll
Okay.
take Callum question in between, and I hope Thierry can react afterwards.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the super interesting presentation, Liz, and yeah, awesome to see you. Well, we see each other quite a lot lately, so it's great to see you again. But I think and maybe this is something that, fingers crossed, we also look to integrate into our UKRI proposal as well. But I'm just interested from your experience from Global Seaweed Star on the behavior change aspects of implementing some of these biosecurity aspects at the kind of the farm level. And if you'd had any thoughts on some of that kind of, the behavior change aspects of implementation of the PMP for the PMPs for seaweed.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key thing is just showcasing how much more money the farmers can get for their crop if they just introduce a few basic biosecurity measures, because it's not just it's the yield, it's the carrageenan, and for Capophycus and Eucheria anyway, it's the carrageenan yield and the quality of that carrageenan that is vastly improved when it's not got the eye size, when it's not covered in these tiny little epiendophytes that obviously compete with the main crop for nutrients and what have you else. So it's actually showing them that they can, with that little bit of extra effort in terms of the labor, in terms of cleaning and shaking the biofilm and shaking the sediment off the lines or what have you, that they can actually get a much higher price at the end of the day. And it's sort of showing them that is actually the case, and convincing them that there are quite simple ways that you can check over your crop when you're attaching it to those lines. You can check over the crop to see that it's actually quite healthy, that it is healthy and able to put it in. But it, for many of them, they just, when we were speaking with them and doing those surveys, they just hadn't, it's just for many of them, it hadn't even crossed their minds that if they brought in some new crop from their neighbor or from their cousin or what have you down the road, that could be one of the main sort of introduction pathways for pests and disease. It was quite interesting to see them sort of be quite taken aback by this information. Anyway, so, but I think showing them that they can get more money at the end of the day for their crop for a little bit of extra effort goes a long way to helping change their behavior, the way they manage their stocks.
And I wonder, in terms of like championing local role models and also having local people telling their neighbours and fellow farmers as well could be interesting.
Yeah, and Callum, that's where your work with the communities in southern Thailand and now rolling that out into Malaysia, all your community engagement is coming, and that's why it's been so good to get you involved in these projects, because it wasn't when we were working with Global Seaweed Star, it was obviously we were going out and doing the survey work, and then we were going back and working with the farmers, but it wasn't about the sort of wider community engagement as such. But that's hopefully what this new project, Global Seaweed Superstar, is all about. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thanks. That was good. Thanks.
So thank you. Thank you. I don't know if Thierry, you are able to react. Otherwise, I have another question in between, and I think that will be the last one. Is there a risk, Liz, if you have hanging seaweeds? That's an example I take from my experience, recent experience in Madagascar, where there is eucalyptus that are left at sea for a long time, over than 45 days. Do you know if there is a risk that this will impact the seaweed farm that is just nearby? Because
yeah, are you saying because
Mm.
they could accumulate epiphytes on the thallus and things like that could then spread back to the farm? Yeah, that is something that we are wanting to look at. This is something that we didn't look at as part of the Global Seaweed Star work, and I would really like to do that, because part of the new project, that the Global Seaweed Superstar that we're on at the moment, it's all about increasing biodiversity and using the farming to do that. So it would kind of make sense if you could leave some of your farm in the water and not harvest it. And I've always sort of said, like in Europe, we have this set aside, the EU, you know, where you farm on land. This is agriculture. You farm, but you leave part of the farm, part of your field where you don't plow it, and you leave it for improving biodiversity and things like this. Could you do the same at sea with your seaweed farms? But then would they become a reservoir for pest and, you know, a refuge for these for the disease? This is something that no one, I don't think, has looked at, unless there is someone that knows more about this, and it really does need more careful thought before this is something that we start recommending. But hopefully people will be looking into this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Can we get Thierry? Can we hear Thierry?
No, still not. Well, we have to close the session. So thank you very much for answering all the questions, Liz, and for this insightful talk. And we invite you to connect for our upcoming webinars, and also don't hesitate to join the coalition as a member if it's not already the case. It's free to join, and you will have access to our different events. So see you next time, and enjoy the rest of your day.